right, I hope you had some generative conversations in your groups. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
I'll ask a question since no one's raising their hand yet that I could see. I was raised in a church that came to EP for years and years, and really, I think, has separated itself from having hope in politics, right, to redeem us. And I also see how these policies affect people in our neighborhoods, and so I have this tension between involving in politics and in order to love my neighbor, and also not seeing that as necessarily where we place our hope, you know, and so many in America have put politics before their faith in the order of priorities. So I don't know, could you speak a little bit to how to maybe balance our faith and politics together as we seek to take these solid steps for people who are marginalized, not just socially, but through actual laws? Maybe that's too big of a question.
Yeah, no. I mean, because it cuts to the heart of where so many people are, so many congregations, because, you know, for some congregations, the word politics is a dirty word. Like if you say reproductive rights or you say racism, you're saying you're preaching politics. No, first, you know, as people of faith, just as citizens of this country, we're called to participate in the body politic. And as we seek to, as faith communities, recognize that we cannot put our full hope, if you will, in the outcomes of any kind of political decisions. We trust and believe our hope to be in God, and for that to animate what we do. But at the same time, we recognize that everything we see, every way our country is governed, our society, that this was human created. Human hands created this. And so what that means is, as we seek to kind of stay in step with what we understand God to be doing, how are we being called to use these human hands to continuously recreate it so that it can be more just and equitable for us all? So from my perspective, I'm all about bridging the two. I'm all about not seeing, okay, my engagement over here is me doing politics, and when I'm over here, I'm exercising my faith, but rather how I'm understanding my engagement and encouraging others as actually an expression of your faith, to be about helping to, do God's work of doing justice, loving mercy, and walking humbly with God. So that, and I think just articulating that can be helpful for people, and not the bifurcation of those things from my perspective.
Thank you.
I found your witness to, we saw this with our own eyes, and the stories, you're reminding us of the stories of Ferguson and George Floyd and the attack on the Capitol to be very powerful. I know that you did this very deliberately, and what I would like to know is, in other times when you have witnessed about this, that this is something we've seen with our own eyes, what kind of reactions you've had to that in the past, and what kind of reactions you hope will happen. Obviously solid steps, but I'm just curious, how has this been an effective way, if it has been an effective way, to get people to make solid steps? I think that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One of the ways that I have found that people resonate with that is they have to sit in the reality of, challenging sometimes what they've been told about things, and for it not to square with what they're seeing with their own eyes, to invite people to remember to trust yourself in this process. So often, especially when we're talking about policing, my entire life I've heard, reports where a person who has been hurt or killed, they've said, oh, that person had a gun, that person had a gun. But yet there would be people who were there in the neighborhood that said, he didn't have a gun. But the question was, well, why would the police lie? This was a time before cell phones. This was a time before everybody having a camera. And, it was just automatic believing. And now today, we're seeing all of these kinds of things with our own eyes. And so the response has been people, number one, responding saying, I can't deny what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, and also what I'm feeling. I am being encouraged to maybe speak up a little more. And what I'm also encouraging people to feel like, don't feel like you have to take that next solid step alone. No matter where you live, no matter what community or communities you're a part of, I promise you, there are others that are having the same kinds of rumblings. How might you seek to connect with those people? And sometimes that next solid step starts with just some very pointed, casual, private conversations with some folks. That's what I have found, where people are finding this effective to say, okay, no, I'm not reading this stuff wrong. I have to trust myself, and I have to be willing to work with some others that are also feeling these same kinds of things. Not that any of us have all the answers, not saying that, but just to begin that process. I hope that gets at it. Okay, thanks.
We have a question from Zoom, a Zoom participant.
Great.
Chris from Denver asks, how does Leah address a concern about performative versus effectual action?
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for that question. What I understand that question to mean is sometimes, people can feel like, oh, the protest, people just protest and, that's just performing and it really doesn't do anything. But I don't agree with that. I believe that just the visual display of having a different perspective and a different opinion is important. It's not enough for people just to hold these perspectives in their hearts or just to write about them or send an email about them. That visual display has made a tremendous difference. And I'm not here to be the judge and jury of people's motivations or, are they doing it just to be seen? I don't have anything to do with that. But what I do believe is that it has been effective throughout history. A lot of times people have said to me throughout the movements over the past decade, oh, this isn't your mom and dad's civil rights movement. This isn't, the 1950s and 60s. We're different. And I have to hold my little finger up and say, excuse me, actually not. If you recall, during the civil rights movement, there were young people leading that too, as are for many people today. So I quite honestly, I think the more people can muster the courage to stand up, to speak out, to seek to disrupt these systems that are so death-dealing in so many ways to so many people, that it can have a lasting effect. And one last thing I want to say about that is we also have to remember that the change we hope to see, you and I may never see it in our lifetime, but we have to fundamentally believe that the seeds that we're planting, that the soil that we're tilling, that the hope that we're inspiring, that the vision that we're casting will make a difference for our children and our children's children.
Hi, thank you. You had mentioned that you had conversations with clergy for, I think it was your first book?
Both books? Uh-huh.
Both books, okay. And in particular, clergy who were on the ground in Ferguson, and recognizing that obviously it wasn't a Christian movement sort of wholesale, that there were diverse opinions and groups there. So my question is, in your conversations with clergy, what do you find to be the unique contribution of the church out of its formation in worship and sacraments? What is the contribution to public discourse and politics as Christian members of a diverse society, specifically the unique contribution of the church out of worship and sacraments? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so as I'm hearing that, one of the things that I think came out of this is people understanding or even seeing the church and seeing protest as a sacramental act. As there are some of the young activists I interviewed. Let me just tell this quick story. She said to me, a young woman, she was early 20s, she said, I grew up in church, and I stopped going because once I became a same gender loving person, I didn't feel welcome. And one day, my grandmother, just to kind of keep her quiet, I went to church with her. And as soon as I walked in, it was a Bible study, and the pastor said, those Ferguson kids, they need to get out the streets and come into the church. And she said to me, I thought your punchline was go out and do. And it took everything in me. I'm sure if you pull the recording, you'd hear me just hollering, you go make disciples, kind of go out and do. And he's telling us to come in. But the point is, she went on to say, I saw Jesus in the streets. When I saw the clergy there with their collars on, their stoles, their collars, whatever clergy signatory they wanted to have, not in the streets because it was like, okay, the clergy are here, now all can be well, but rather clergy coming and speaking and saying, we are here to support, we are here, yes, as representatives and reminders that God's presence is also here, and that we are here recognizing that, the sacredness of this is doing the work of God and doing the work of the church. And so, right, to the point, this by no means was or has ever been a Christian movement per se. There are people of many faiths that have been engaged. Some I interviewed for the books as well. But from a Christian perspective, I think it has really sought to renew our perspective on how we might need to think more deeply within our congregations what it means to worship and to engage in the sacraments and what is sacred, and how do we do that and think about it through the lens of doing this kind of work. Does that get at it a little bit? Okay, thanks.
It does seem like we live in a time where we're all trying to kind of signal to others our virtue and self-righteousness, and so we can get kind of cynical about anybody's statements. And it seems like part of what was so compelling about the civil rights movement was people's willingness to sacrifice and to self-sacrifice. And it seems like maybe that's in some ways a uniquely Christian stance. And so I'm just curious, what about the role of self-sacrifice in all of this?
It's essential in terms of, and that'll mean different things for different people. When we talk about moving from a safe step to a solid step, what might sacrifice mean? And quite honestly, from a Christian perspective, there is no getting to resurrection without going by the way of the cross. And what I mean by that is, if we're going to be serious about creating the kind of world where we believe God's justice and mercy and love are truly being animated and affected toward all people, that is the road of most resistance. sacrifice will be required. What that means for different people may not be the same thing, but it's not a skating road where you just put your skates on and skate on down. And so to sit with that reality, I think is really important. And to talk about it and what that might mean for different folks is important. Thank you.